So it is very hard for me to immediately jump into a writing session. Whether I've just gotten up in the morning or I just got off of work, I need something to kind of segue myself from work brain or relaxation brain into creative brain. And one of my favorite ways to do that is to just read a few pages of one of these 5 novels. These books are all pretty different from each other, but what they share in common is that reading just a few pages or even just a few paragraphs, something clicks in my brain and it makes me want to put words on paper. And why exactly these books help me will make more sense as I go along, so I'll just start listing them. The first one is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. This, I think, debatably is the best written book out of these 5. It is so deeply personal, while also being very immediate and visceral. What I think this one does really well is it rides that line between just telling a good story that is engaging and well-paced, but never really losing the heart, losing the actual purpose behind why he's telling these stories. This is one that makes me want to write simply because it's such a high bar, but in a way that's different from reading like a Cormac McCarthy, where it seems out of this world possible to write like somebody like that. It's also out of this world to write like Tim O'Brien, but he writes so simply. It almost tricks me into thinking that maybe one day I could aspire to write like that. So I don't know, maybe it makes me a little bit delusional about my own abilities, but it's just, it's a fantastic book, and I like to keep it nearby, especially if I'm writing something a little bit more serious or personal. The next book is a classic, and that's Fahrenheit 451. I did not have to read this in high school, and so it sort of escaped that stigma of just being a required reading book, which can make things feel very stale even if they're not. So when I read this as an adult, it just grabbed me by the throat and threw me around and surprised me in just how loose, I would say, it is with some of the standard rules of writing. The way that Bradbury just jumps from one thought to another, from one scene to another so quickly without ever really losing you or losing focus is just incredible. I've heard where Bradbury has talked about the idea of writing without thinking. I think it's also the Hemingway idea of you write drunk and you edit sober. Like, write without any kind of inhibitions, because that's where you're going to get some of your more honest thoughts or ideas on paper, and then you can always go back, trim them, refine them, bring some focus to them. And I think that comes through very well in Fahrenheit 451. And like other books on this list, something that I find inspirational is just how short it is. I think it's around 45,000 words. And because I tend to write shorter fiction, either short stories or shorter novels, it kind of inspires me with how much it's able to accomplish in so small of a word count. The next book, and this is the first book that I started bringing with me on writing sessions because I just found it that inspirational, is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Yes, it is Neil Gaiman, but because this is the book that sort of got me into this practice of just reading a few sentences before I write, I had to mention it. When I first read this book, it really hit me in the gut. I'm already a very nostalgic type of person, and Gaiman is able to capture that feeling of looking back on your childhood as an adult with sort of a new outlook, like capturing those same feelings that you had, but now you have this new perspective that you're looking at them from. And his prose is just really simple and powerful, and it doesn't have that kind of witty, sometimes grating sense of humor that Neil Gaiman's work can sometimes have. I just love it, and I still go back to it very often just to kind of snap me into that dream-like perspective that he's able to capture really, really well. And yet again, this is another one that is, I think he originally intended it as a short story, but it's very, very short, and it packs more of a punch than books 3 or 4 times its length. This next one is a bit of a curveball, and that's Jim Thompson's The Killer Inside Me. This is an awful, repulsive, maybe a little bit evil book, but it has some of the best first-person perspective writing that I think I've maybe ever read. And I think the magic trick that it pulls is that it puts you so deeply into the perspective and the mind of this awful person, and yet you always feel like you're getting pushed away into the corner. You're being not given all of the facts, not all of the truths, which seems so odd because you've been right there with him. You're in his head the whole time. And right up until the end, it was chilling, it was surprising. It's one of the high bars that I look to, and I'll turn to it often just to get a sense of how to sort of bring the reader into that sharp first-person perspective. It's a wild book. I'm not necessarily recommending it as a whole, but it's worked for me. And the last book, this is the book that I've gone to the most often to just get me in the mood to write, and that's Stephen King's Misery. And similar to Fahrenheit 451, the writing here seems to come from this really just instinctual, immediate place where I don't know how much revision went into the writing of Misery, but I can totally believe that just a coked out Stephen King wrote this in one session and sent it to the printing press. Another magic trick that it pulls off is that I have gone back and thought that this was written in first person, only to then remember, oh no, it was written in a very sharp third person limited perspective. And whenever I write in third person and I really want it to be that limited viewpoint, this is a go-to for me because it makes use of third person in a way that gives you a little bit of flexibility in building out your environment or describing other characters, but without ever really losing that main character's perspective. And I think why this is a go-to for me when I'm writing and why it hardly ever fails to inspire me to write is that as much as I'm a fan of more highbrow literary fiction at times, I really just love genre writing. I love genre movies. And I like the kind of thing that just keeps you on the edge of your seat and is able to sustain tension over the course of, many, many pages, many, many hours, and only gives you that release until it's the ideal moment. And so, yeah, this is one that I will take with me to coffee shops or on trips where I know that I'm going to be doing some writing because it's just that good. So that's it. These are the 5 non-writing writing books that put me in the mood to write. There are some others depending on what I'm working on, but these are kind of like the foundational ones, at least right now in my writing journey. Let me know in the comments if there's any fiction or nonfiction books that you like to go to just help inspire you when you sit down to write. I'd love to hear what they are. Anyhow, thanks for watching.